I began looking at the military when I was in high school. My sophomore year of college was 9/11, and that was really the tipping point for me.
Another plane just hit.
And we stand together to win the war.
I knew I wanted to go in special operations. The Army gave me the chance to go straight into Special Forces, and then based on what we do and how we do it is what I was drawn to.
Wolverine 5, you're clear to engage. Initial Mike 2 Alpha.
What SF teams really do best is employ ourselves in an environment as a very small element, and then through advising, training, organization, we are able to create a much larger fighting force. Right? What Green Berets really are, above all else, are problem solvers and teachers. That's how we make our money. That's why we get sent places to do stuff. Name is Nick Lavery. I am an active duty member of the United States Army Special Forces, more commonly referred to as the Green Berets, where I serve as a chief warrant officer on a Special Forces detachment. My father in particular really kind of drove in the quiet professional mentality into me as a kid. And my father would continuously educate me on it's not about what you say, it's about what you do. And you need to be a man of action and let your actions speak for themselves. Ironically, as it may be or not, when I decided to eventually come into SF, we are referred to as the quiet professionals. So I've had that mentality built into me from a very young age, relatively seamless transition into conducting business as a professional with that same kind of approach. Yeah, I think the difference between training and working out is the intent, the purpose behind what it is you're doing in that moment. It's really having a firm grasp of the why. Why am I walking into this gym right now? And having that vision refined to a degree where it's driving you into the facility. Working out is great. If you go in there and you get a workout in, that's not necessarily mean that you're not focused, you're not taking it seriously. But I think when you're training for something. At work, when we go to the range to train, we are training to be able to go do that in operations. Right? We're not going to the range to just have fun and just kind of go through the motions. It's very deliberate in what we're doing. So there's a strategy that really has already been laid out prior to even entering that facility, where I know that this workout on this day is in line with reaching this particular objective, which is in line with reaching this ultimate end state. When I enter a training environment, whether that's a pool, on a track, or in a weight room, my focus is on that upcoming objective, that 25-meter target that I am training for in that moment. And once I get in there, once I get loosened up, the music goes on, and I eliminate everything else from my world, then it's just complete and total focus on each activity I'm doing, each task, each specific rep, because I know that those things are all linked together. When you have that sense of purpose behind why you're doing what you're doing, whether it's in the gym or not, is going to take you to another level. First injury in terms of being wounded in action in combat, right? And there's a whole list of football injuries and stuff like that, but let's get into the meat and potatoes. First time I was wounded in combat was in September of 2012 when I took some shrapnel to the back of my shoulder. blew about a lemon-sized hole in it. Really wasn't a big deal. Was out of the fight for about a week or so until it closed up enough for me to get back on what I needed to do. Second injury, second time I was wounded in combat was in November of 2012 when I took an AK-47 round to the face. Sounds a lot worse than it was. You know, it just grazed me just enough to, you know, rip my cheek open, but another, you know, inch to the right and you and I wouldn't be having this conversation right now. Similar time frame, was medevaced, eventually got it stitched up. They kept an eye on me for a few days to make sure there wasn't any crazy infection, and then I was back with the boys doing my thing pretty much right after that. Third time I was wounded in action was in March of 2013, which I took a bunch of machine gun rounds to both my legs, most of which were into my right leg, which obviously ended up with me losing it. And then a couple nicks here and there throughout that time period and after, and then my next kind of somewhat substantial injury was, I want to say around December of 2016, I was involved in an IED, which rang my bell pretty good. I was not formally treated for that. I wasn't medevaced out. I just kind of dealt with a pretty severe headache for a few days, myself and the rest of the guys that were in that vehicle. There wasn't anything that took me out of the fight for really any period of time at all. March 11th, 2013 began like most of the days did for us. And this is on the back end of our deployment. We had already been there for five and a half months. So we were at the tail end of our trip, right? So not only another maybe 2 or 3 weeks left, and we would be rotating out with the guys coming in behind us. So we had been going, you know, hard in the paint for that amount of time. That was a challenging deployment. A lot of guys were getting banged up. A lot of guys were getting killed, which is exactly the type of deployment we wanted. So we got what we wanted. We had a joint operation plan for that day. When I say joint, I mean it was our team. We had our Afghan National Army Special Forces team that were living with us. We then also had some regular Afghan National Army guys. We had some Afghan National Police guys, and we had some Afghan local police guys. So these are all different units, okay? Which was common for us. Depending on the size of the operation that we were doing, we may need more bodies, they would provide us more bodies. Our SOP, our standard operating procedure that we adopted for these bigger joint missions was the partners would show up. The partner forces would arrive to our camp if that's where we were meeting them, and they would stay outside of our perimeter. The leadership from those elements would come into our motor pool area, which is basically a word for a parking lot where our vehicles would be staged and some other equipment. Our leadership would come in, and our leadership would brief them on what we were doing that day. They would then go tell their troops, and then we would roll. Just to keep the amount of bodies that were in our immediate perimeter at a minimum, right? Because it's a vulnerable position when you're there. And this is what we had executed for months. Well, on this particular day, the leadership came in and a Ford Ranger pickup truck also drove in. Now at the time I was a weapons guy. That was my specialty on the team. And the weapons guys are also responsible for base security. So I immediately noticed this, like that's a breach of our SOP. And I have to make a decision on whether or not I am going to address that right here and now, or if I'm gonna wait and let it ride. I decide to wait, okay? A decision that I have to live with for the rest of my life. Vehicle comes in and we begin our pre-mission brief, okay? Where are we going, what we're doing, cool. We're doing our radio check, final comms checks, and we're all in basically this massive like circle. And My radio is good to go. Yep, I'm up. And I actually turn and start walking away towards my vehicle that was staged kind of just behind me. And they're finishing off the comms checks. As I'm walking away, I hear gunfire coming from behind me. And one of the Afghan local police guys jumped up on the back of this Ford Ranger that had a truck-mounted PKM machine gun, which is a massive belt-fed machine gun, and just started opening fire into the group. My first instinct when I hear the rounds is that one of our partner force guys just accidentally clacked off a round, which wouldn't be that uncommon to happen. After the third, fourth, fifth round, I'm like, no, someone's shooting deliberately and it's coming from right behind me. So I snap my head around and I see this guy in the back of the truck shooting into the crowd. Bodies are falling, people are running. My training tells me to move to cover and eliminate the threat. When I say move to cover, I mean move to something that can stop bullets and then eliminate that problem. That's what we're trained to do. And I ultimately end up not doing that. And I don't do that. And the reason why is there was one of our infantry guys who was there. We had an infantry squad that was attached to us, about 15 dudes, who was set to come out on that mission with us that day as one of the drivers for one of our vehicles. A young kid, first deployment ever. And he's basically like a deer in headlights, just frozen. And he's maybe not more than 20 feet from this shooter. And seeing that and processing it, obviously rapidly, superseded my training. So I end up going for this dude. And I get to him, and he's not more than maybe 10, 12 feet away from me. I get to him and basically put myself in between him and the shooter. And that was when I was hit for the first time. Right, boom, right in the back of my leg. It's like a sledgehammer. So I get knocked on top of this kid, and I feel another couple more impacts into my legs. So I know I'm hit. Okay. Now we got to move to cover. Like, you're actually being shot. Okay. So I drag him and myself to behind one of the trucks that was there. And all this is happening really, really fast. Right? I get to that. I get to a piece of cover, and gunfire is still going on. I grab a rifle that was laying on the ground. One of my teammates had dropped theirs, and I go to get eyes on this threat, and I take a couple really horribly placed shots, and one of my teammates ultimately ends up coming in and eliminates that threat. Now, this was the initiation of a complex ambush. So when this guy started shooting at us, we also started taking machine gun and rockets from outside our perimeter. So now it's a full-on firefight at this point. Immediate threat has been eliminated. I can tell that there are things going on around, but I'm in no position to really address that myself. So I go to my next course action, which is to check the status of this infantry soldier. So I check him. He's got no holes in his body. He's in shock, but he's relatively okay. Next course action, I need to check myself because I know I was hit. So I expose my leg, rip the pants open, and my leg is pretty much just kind of hammered meat at this point, tissue, bone, and I can see this river of blood flowing from where I was laying to where I had initially been hit. And seeing that made me recognize that my femoral artery had been cut. My training tells me with that, I probably have maybe 8 or 9 minutes left-ish before I am drained of blood. So time is of the essence. So I get a tourniquet and I slap that on my leg, wrench it down as tight as I can. Bleeding doesn't stop. I get a second tourniquet, put that on, wrench it down as tight as I can. I still don't think the bleeding has stopped. Right around there, one of my teammates gets to me, and the look on his face pretty much said it all. And I'm trying to get him away from me, right? I'm like, I'm done. I was convinced that I was dying right there and then. And I didn't want him wasting time on me because I knew that there were people that were wounded all around me. People now are screaming. It's somewhat chaos. And I wanted him to go work on those that could be saved. And I didn't think I was one of them. So I'm telling him to fuck off. And he of course ignores me. You know, he does what he's trained to do. He puts a third tourniquet on my leg. He gets IV access for blood products or fluids if needed. And then his work there is pretty much done. He's done pretty much what he can do. So he moves on to the next guy that needs to be worked on. So I'm laying there and 3 tourniquets on my leg, and I still feel like I'm bleeding out, right? I'm looking, and it is just blood everywhere, but I still feel like I'm bleeding out. And I managed to grab my leg and just kind of lift it up, and I could see blood seeping out of the wound. So I said, nope, the bleeding hasn't stopped yet, and you are really running short on time. Have you done everything? And the answer was no. So I grabbed some gauze out of my personal first aid kit. I loosened up one of the tourniquets, and I just rammed this gauze into my leg. And I'm feeling around, I'm trying to feel a pulse, to feel for the femoral artery, to be able to get direct pressure on top of it. At this point, the blood is shunting inwards to protect my organs, so I really can't feel anything. Like, I got no dexterity. It's like numb. It's like I'm working with these meat mittens. But I think I feel something. You know, I'm scraping past broken bone. Like, the pain is just now really kicking in, like searing pain that's trying to just eject through my eyeballs. And I think I feel something. You know, I just press down as hard as I can. I re-secure the tourniquet on top of it. And then I actually pass out at that point for not long, maybe 10 seconds. Come to, and at that point I was convinced my work here really is done. Like, I got nothing left. So I pretty much just drug myself over to one of my teammates who was laying down maybe 5 or 6 feet from me. He had taken a round through his calf, and he had been treated. You know, tourniquet was on. He was in a relatively stable position, not life-threatening. And I just thought that the remaining time I had left on Earth, I would just want to spend trying to comfort those guys the best I could, which is what I did. It took about an hour to an hour and a half, somewhere in there, before a medevac bird, a helicopter, could land to pick us up, because it was an ongoing fight. So I'm on the ground an hour and a half before I'm medevaced out. I get on a bird, and they pull the most severely wounded guys out first. It was me and 2 other dudes. And they had a couple options on where they were going to send us, right? One was a closer location. It was a shorter flight, but it had a lower level of medical care. They had basically what we refer to as a forward surgical team that was located at this base, which is a hodgepodge of different medical professionals that all kind of come together. They can perform surgeries, they can do stuff, very proficient. It's just not a full-scale hospital. The full-scale hospital was a little bit farther away, so they went with speed versus level of care, which makes a lot of sense. Time was of the essence for us. So they get us to this location, and I need a blood transfusion bad. I am just about out of blood. So they throw me on a blood transfusion, and they start pumping me full of blood. Unfortunately, a mistake was made, and they mixed up my name with my teammate's name, who was on the same flight as me. And they gave me his blood type, which is not compatible to mine. So this essentially kills me, right? I mean, I was already in critical condition as it was, and now I'm being pumped full of incompatible blood type. So everything starts to shut down. My liver and kidneys and organs all start dying, and they aren't sure exactly why, but they know I need to be in a higher level of care. So they put me back on another helicopter, and they send me to Bagram Air Force Base, or Bagram Airfield.
Hey, 1751, we're gonna haul ass, so if you can keep up, great. If not, we'll meet you there. Okay, we'll send it over, but I don't think we'll be able to keep up with you.
It's while I'm on that flight, which is not more than maybe like 9 or 10 minutes, that they realize what happened with the blood. So they call the hospital that I'm being flown to, and they tell them, this is what just happened. There's no way this dude survives the flight. Just be prepared to receive his body, and that's gonna be it. So they're like, okay, cool. And I stop here for a second because it actually took me a long time to be able to tell that portion of the story with the blood transfusion, because it's real easy to hear that and, ask yourself, like, how is that possible, right? How is that possible? How can they make such an egregious mistake? And the reality is, we live in the world of human error, and when stress is high and adrenaline's pumping, people make mistakes, and that's what happened. And I really am protective of our medical community because they saved my life. That I really don't want them judged for a mistake that was made. It's one that I certainly hold no ill will towards any of them for doing. And to be able to fast forward a little bit, because of that incident, a mass distro was sent out to the entire medical community in the area, in that entire region of the world, saying this is what just happened. And they actually updated their blood protocols with how they handle blood and how they administer blood because of what happened to me. So I look at it through that lens, and I was obviously strong enough and lucky enough to be able to survive. But if that hadn't happened to me and those protocols hadn't been updated, who's to say that that mistake wouldn't have happened again or for the first time with someone else who was unable to survive? So in a lot of ways, I'm grateful that that happened to me because I was able to survive, and our processes have been updated to mitigate that from happening again in the future. So just an important lesson to be learned.